when it says on the title slide there, the ECRs or Edgar Cayce readings on economic healing, most people are used to calling it in this day and age prosperity. But the readings, if you were to go to the original ones, in fact, the circulating pile is entitled Economic Healing. So if you can get used to that wording through there, it'll make sense as we go through, although there's not too many conflicts as we go. I just throw this out there because they asked me to at headquarters, having to do with a lot of people say that, oh, well, I don't read the Edgar Cayce readings the same way you did, and I interpreted it this way. And I think that's wonderful. I really do. In fact, if one of the things that happens as a result of this talk is for you to continue your own research and education into the topic, that's as good as it gets. Because certainly, John, I like to say that I report things according to the Gospel of John, Schroeder. So I just going to live with that on my end of it. And these things, most of it has been the Edgar Cayce readings, but you probably heard of Catherine Ponder or Napoleon Hill and others that are also pundits on the subject of prosperity. So most of it from the Cayce readings is, and this is my take on it. And without further ado, this really breaks down to 3 or 4 sections. And so just a title slide right here. I wanted to make it clear that becoming prosperous really does start with our self-esteem. So how we feel about ourselves is going to make a lot of difference when it comes to how successful we can be in trying to implement prosperity in our life. So what you're seeing right here is actually a scan of a textbook that I had back when I first got out of college. Now, we had just barely gotten beyond discovering fire and rocks and dirt, but they had also invented economics back at that time. And what you're seeing right here, it actually shocked me because I didn't have an economics class back in K through 12. And so this thing comes up, and the teacher, as I like to say, within 10 minutes, I got very discouraged with college, and the teacher took the first 9 minutes taking roll. So the very first words out of her mouth is the study of economics is that there is not enough land, labor, and capital to meet everyone's needs. And so being a scarcity of what we need to get by in life would meet everybody's needs there's the science of economics that says, how do you accomplish what you see in this diagram? So you have limited resources and unlimited wants, and that means that since there isn't enough to cover both, there's scarcity, and then you have to make choices as to what, how, and for whom to produce things. Needless to say, I didn't even get through my first class of economics. I later went back and took it, and then I even got an MBA in business or marketing. So I did get over my hump there to understand how do we live in this dualistic society to be in the world and not of it. Because I even raised my hand and said, what about the whole concept of abundance in which, God provides everything that we need? That went over poorly. So we had to move on from that class and take it up later on when I knew to keep my mouth shut. This is a reading. Just a quick quote from 2803-2, and it says, "For while selflessness is the law, to belittle self is a form of selfishness, not selfless." So, and I don't think you need to get so bad as to talk about deprecating humor, where you're putting yourself down out there, because sometimes, a joke is just a joke without a negative intent behind it. But you have to be careful that if you wind up doing that enough, or you use it as a defense mechanism to put yourself down before others do, it can really start to have an effect on you. So, and you see a note to myself down there in the bottom that I really do break the idea of what is it that we do here on Earth, and it can be broken down into basically health, wealth, and our relationships, just as broad categories. And of those three, so talking about health and relationships, I think those are much easier to get across or to learn the lessons about them than you have when you try to deal with wealth. For instance, with health, everybody realizes that if you're going to smoke, drink, and carouse and stay up late and not get enough sleep and all that, and your health starts to suffer, they go, I know what I need to do. I need to go ahead and get a balanced diet, an exercise program, and get enough sleep, and, and not just be carousing around all the time, and then my health will improve. With relationships, Casey says it better than anybody. If you want friends, you need to be friendly. And if you want love, you need to be loving. And everybody understands the law of attraction when it comes to being the person that you would like to attract to yourself. When it comes to wealth, try going to your CPA and seeing, I don't have enough money to be able to pay all my bills. I don't think the first thing the CPA is going to suggest is that you should tithe. Not going to happen. They're going to look at you and go, oh, well, we got to put you on a budget and you're going to cut back on the money that you spend on all that things and you're tithing. No, that needs to go away for a while. So it's counterintuitive as far as what secular society says for how to be able to become prosperous in life relative to the way the Cayce readings and other sources that approach it from a spiritual perspective would recommend. Now, I'm a dog lover. And when we're talking about self-esteem being good for prosperity, first of all, that dog looks very prosperous to me. If you're a puppy dog lover and you see that dog, you said that dog is happy as it can be. It's probably got its master right there scratching his chest. And you are the one thing I love about dogs is, and we have one, Cookie. And one thing, when we're petting Cookie like that, Cookie is absolutely certain that Cookie deserves every good thing that happens to her. And she thinks that we made and hung the moon, mom and dad's, John and Stephanie Schroeder, that she would do anything for us and that we deserve the same. When I see that kind of a relationship that you can have with an animal like that, that's just pure, unabated love, then you can go in there and say, this is truly the kind of relationship that if we recognize and accept and are open to having with God, that that really is the beginning of being able to solve not just prosperity, but health, wealth, and relationships in our lives, any of the challenges we have there. So a quote I really find that gets us off on the right track here is the strongest single factor in prosperity and consciousness is self-esteem. Believing you can do it, believing you deserve it, believing you will get it. in my own life, and you'll find that if you remember my talk back in January, I kind of like to bring a concept out there and then give you one or more anecdotes or examples to be able to show application of the concept. And as I was growing up, my father was an engineer. And he was a very successful engineer. And that was something because he had very low self-esteem with the parenting that he had when he was growing up. He didn't feel very good about himself, but he felt very good about being able to provide for his family. So my mother didn't have to work, and he had to travel a lot, but he was providing for us, and that was how he saw himself as I'm doing everything right. One of the things that happened when he was in, finishing up college and he got in his last semester and he got a job offer to go work on the Panama Canal. And that was, I believe, back in the late 40s, early 50s, 1940s and 50s. And so he left college in that last semester because he already had the job of his dreams right then, went down to the Panama Canal, and he stayed with that company for a number of years. And then he got wooed away by another company, and we moved to California. And in California, he was doing really well with that company. And he got to be about 50 years old in engineering when the boss of the company hired his son, and his son came in there and started giving grief to my father. He was like, well, who are you, whippersnapper, and what's going on here? And the son just says, well, you're fired. It's not that somebody of my father's talents couldn't get another job, but he didn't have a college degree. And when, let's see, when he turned 50, that would have been around close to 1970. And so in 1970, if you're trying to get an engineering job without a college degree, your resume isn't going to cut it. And make a long story short, my father never got another job the rest of his life. He was not able to get hired by anybody out there. And so he went through a Great Depression because at that point, the only thing that he really hung his hat on for being able to say, I'm prosperous because I'm providing for my family, and you take that one thing away and you feel like I'm just no darn good underneath all of that, he really went through some very difficult times. And my mother had never worked, and she, it'd be kind of hard to go out there and get a job as she's, pretty much the same age around that time and had nothing on her resume. There wasn't really any jobs to make a difference like that. And so you can believe that the family was really having some tough financial times. As they were going through all these challenges out there, one of the things that occurred is that my mother's mother passed away. And she wasn't a wealthy woman, but she had a decent amount of money that came in at just the right time, so we didn't have to get thrown out of our home, and we could keep food on the table and all of that. And I remember when they told my brother and I were just, I think my brother was barely a teenager, and he was 3 years older than me, and told us about that and said, "Oh, wow, what are you going to buy, if we have this money?" And the first thing my mother said was, "We're going to tithe 10% of it to the ARE." And of course, in our infinite wisdom, my brother and I said, "Are you crazy? I mean, as much as we've been struggling with all of this stuff, how are we going to wind up, giving the money away like that? It seems like, why don't you wait until we get back on our feet in order to be able to afford to do that?" And she just kind of smiled and shook her head, and she goes, "Someday you'll understand this." And we did. But at that point, they just went ahead and did it. And my father was still not able to get a job, and that money was starting to run out. Oddly enough, there was it was actually aunts to her mother. So it was, it was my mother's aunts. And they wind up passing away, and it was just two spinsters, and nobody knew much about them, but they were incredibly wealthy, and they didn't leave a will. And so there were a number of people that just by the law, the estate got split up. So it wasn't quite a wealth when it came through to the family at that point. But the whole point of this story is that we are given exactly what we need in order to learn our lessons and continue to do the good work. Because my mother, I don't know if this comes up much, but she was a full-time volunteer for the ARE from the 1960s all the way up to 2000, early 2000s. I mean, she was working more than 40 hours a week without pay in order to be able to keep the ARE going over in California. So she was the source of income, of prosperity for the family, even though she was the one that wasn't working. And it had to do with her faith, her service, her belief in God, saying, "We will be provided for, we will be given what we need," and was able to, the amount of money that they got from that was enough for her to live on for the rest of her life. She didn't have any financial problems. My father was given the opportunity and a lot of time to sit there and watch how this was unfolding, saying, "The money is coming in from the woman who never worked in this world, and I need to figure out where is my self-esteem based on if I don't have this job out here." And I actually believe in the principles of the Edgar Cayce readings that all of us are absolutely priceless to God. The real measure of your wealth is how much you'd be worth if you lost all of your money. So when you look at that statement, I probably would have worded it a little differently. I say the real measure of your worth is what do you do when you lose all your wealth, and how you feel about yourself, and if you didn't have the things as my father wound up having happen to him. So, when I go back to health, wealth, and relationships, upon death, as you see the little note there at the bottom, we've got perfect health. When we go to the other side, all of a sudden, all of the infirmities that we had in our physical body are now gone. As I understand it, there's lots of friends to meet us on the other side, so we're at no loss for friendship. But we don't go over there with any money. So when you think about if at the point where we pass over to the other side and we have no wealth, so to speak, in terms of money, that's the real measure of who we are is at that point. And that's when you go through the life review and you're able to go ahead and look at every nuance of the life that just went by to be able to say, did the entity gain or not? So a Henry Ford quote here. Even a mistake may turn out to be the one thing necessary to a worthwhile achievement. Um, you know, there are two things that come to mind right here. And one of them is the idea that if you're trying to push a car, I mean, turn a car, you don't just turn the wheels unless the car is in motion. It's so much easier to be able to even make a U-turn if the car is already in motion. So Casey, actually, this is one place where the United States Army matched up with the Edgar Cayce readings. I went to basic training 100 years ago, and the drill sergeants would constantly yell at us because a lot of people just freeze up when people are yelling at you. So you're a brand new training soldier, and the drill sergeant would come up as somebody who were to freeze, and he'd say, "All right, trainee, do something even if it's wrong." Interesting concept. They were trying to get them to start taking action and get used to taking action instead of it being your knee-jerk reaction to just do nothing. And so the same idea with Casey was saying, that even our wrong actions turn out to be another step on the path toward righteousness. That even if we're doing wrong things and we are trying our best out there, somehow it will get turned around. I got a note there on the bottom of a couple of things that were absolute mistakes. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of vulcanized rubber, where we have like Goodyear tires of today that made car travel, even across the United States, was really, you'd have to change your tires about 2 or 3 times if you were to try to go from, say, Virginia Beach to New York, because the rubber was so insufficient back then. I don't know if you heard what happened, but the guy had somebody at the front door, and he was working on trying to get a tougher rubber, and he put the jar up on the top, and he didn't quite get it there, and it fell onto the stove, and the stove was heated up down below. Well, he goes and he answers the door, and he forgets all about it, and it is that process of taking the rubber that he had and heating it up that vulcanizes it and allows it to be as tough as it is now. So that was a definite mistake, but the guy's name was Goodyear. So you can understand where that came from. I don't know if you know what Post-it, of course you know what Post-it notes are, but they were trying to develop a much better adhesive for sticking things together. And at first, the 3M Corporation thought that that Post-it notes, or the adhesive that they had come up with, had been an absolute disaster, and they didn't know how to fix it until somebody figured out how to use that continuous use of adhesive in order to make Post-it notes. And now who can live without them? I have them. I can see 5 in front of me right now. I don't know if you're familiar with Marianne Williamson, but she's actually running for president right now on the Democratic Party side of things. Not doing too terribly, surprisingly enough. She's like in 3rd or 4th place. But this is just a snippet of a longer talk that she gave. That it's probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen that came from someplace other than the Cayce readings. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are more powerful beyond measure. It is light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? I really like that because it captures in just that one statement right there exactly what I think it is when God created us in God's image. There isn't anything egotistical to talk about each one of us being brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous, because we were created in God's perfect image. Now, what we've done with that since then, well, I'm not the first person to say this. You're not catching us at our best at the moment, but we will get better, absolutely. And I think one of the things that helps us, especially if we're going through really tough challenges, what do they call that? The dark night of the soul. That if you're really going through challenges out there, is to remember that karma is not intended to be punitive. It is meant to be instructive. And if you recognize that, see, if you think it's punitive, then maybe a lot of people feel like all I have to do is endure all this awful stuff. And then when I've met my karma quota, whatever that winds up being, then all of a sudden life will become better. So I just have to sit it out until this is all past. That's not that's a real problem, because if we don't learn the lesson that caused the negative karma in the first place, we're doomed to repeat it until we do get the lesson. That's the bad news about it being instructive. The good news about it is if you look at the challenges coming at you as being an opportunity to become a better person, then you start asking better questions. You ask questions like, what's good about this? What can I do to turn this to my advantage? And the answers that you get to that are going to put you on the right path. So now we have a Cayce reading here. Ooh, I'm going to have to move that because I can't read it. Okay, so it's 270-28. And the question was, please tell me of the opportunities that will come to me when financial conditions have adjusted themselves. Now, mind you, I have the date down there at the bottom too, on August 6, 1931. So you realize this is somebody that's right there in the throes of the Great Depression. And Cayce's answer to be able to give us an idea of how things look from a spiritual side is, why seek so much for the future? Why not make use of that in the present? And there are people that became wealthy in the midst of the Depression, but they were looking at things a whole lot different than somebody saying, tell me when things have adjusted themselves that I can go out there and give it my best effort to be able to become prosperous. So until we learn to use what we have in hand, no matter what the financial economic conditions are out there, we keep putting everything off into the future, and we're really trying to pick up a chair that we're sitting in. We're hindering our own progress when we keep giving ourselves conditions that it can only happen in the future because, gosh, we're in the middle of the Great Depression right now. So Napoleon Hill, if you're familiar with him, he's a pundit on the prosperity side of things. Successful people make decisions quickly and firmly. Unsuccessful people make decisions slowly, and they change them often. I have heard this story since I was a young child, but it's probably one of the most demonstrative ones as far as how this works. In the early 1940s, Cayce, there was good news and bad news. The good news is Cayce had a waiting list of months to be able to try to fulfill all the readings, and he started doing more and more and more of them to the point where they actually became prosperous in their last days when he wasn't sick, because he was able to get more and more money from doing that many readings. Now, that meant because they had more money that instead of running it out of the Cayce living room, the ARE out of the Cayce living room, they could actually start to go look for properties to be able to buy a different building. Remember, they lost the hospital building in I guess 1930, 1931, 30. So they lost the hospital building right back then, and they didn't acquire it again until that hospital building property until, I believe, somewhere in the 1950s. So they started thinking about and looking to step up out of the living room into a building. And they sent I think they had 15 board members at the time, and they sent the 15 board members out for everybody to come back and say, here's the property I think we ought to have. And they all had a meeting where they were together. And in that meeting, this is how Cayce always worked. They were supposed to come up with the decision of which of those properties they thought was best. Then they could check with Edgar to see if that was the right choice or not. And it was pretty easy to narrow it down to two choices. Of the 15, they came up with two. And then finally, in working it out together and talking about the pros and cons of each, they came up with one of the properties. The fascinating part was, was when they said this to Cayce. Cayce said, well, all things considered, when you folks met, of the two properties that you had come down as the finalists, the lesser of the two is the one that you chose. The one that you didn't choose would have been the better investment. However, because of the way that you met together in patience, in love, in cooperation, the universe has rearranged itself so that you have now made the other property the better investment. Think on that one for a second. That means that the universe is rearranging itself because of the decisions that we make, because of the vibrations that we put out through the way that we deal with other people in cooperation, in fellowship, in love, and patience. And I have a little video here. You may have seen this one in the past, but you're wondering, do vibrations really affect the atomic structure of the universe in such a way that it gets rearranged like that? Well, what you're seeing right here is a stereo speaker, a loudspeaker right there, and on the top of it, with a little screw there in the top, it has a black metal plate attached to the top, and then you see these wires that go up to this machine over here, which is called a tone generator. So it can, just like bom, 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 bom. So it keeps going up and up depending on where you set it. So in describing that, you're going to see this video unfold in which you see that. Now you'll see the tone generator right there, and you're able to go ahead and change the frequency of that tone generator, and you put salt crystals on top of that black metal plate. And then you set the tone of what you want, and at 345 hertz, turn it on. And if you think of those salt crystals as being the atomic structure of the universe, if you look at this thing at the correct resonant frequencies, it literally creates these exact same patterns every time. This is not just magic for this particular video. This is a scientific experiment. It comes up with these patterns identically this way according to the 2041 cycles or hertz right now as you go through that. So it's making it clear as far as if you think of the salt crystals as being the atoms and you had the vibrations, manifesting from us and our intentions and our patience and our cooperation and our love, that it is rearranging the atomic structure of the universe around us. If that sounds incredible, remember that the Cayce reading said that the vibrations that come from humanity on Earth actually cause sunspots. That's 93 million miles away. So if you're a little worried about, how far does that actually affect? Is it a 5-mile radius, 10? Well, apparently it works up to 93 million miles. This is, if you look down at the bottom there, the name is Fibonacci. He was a mathematician, I think, back in the 13th century, somewhere in there. And there are a number of ways of being able to look at this. If you look here in the lower right corner where I have the pictures, you're seeing the Fibonacci circle manifested in nature. This is a sunflower right here in which the swirls come out as in a rose, as in a cutaway of a snail shell, as in a hurricane, as in a galaxy, and even the human ear winds up following this pattern of this swirl that's going out. Now, if you care about the math, it's over here in this corner where you start with 0 and then you add 1 to it. And that gives you 1. And then you take 1 and you add another 1 to it to get 2. And from that point, you keep going by adding the previous numbers. You take that 1 and that 2, and then you get 3. Then you take that 3 and that 2, and you get 5. Then that 5 and that 3, and you get 8, and so on. So when you start to see this, this is literally a graph that I'm showing you right here with this swirl that comes out. So if you think of that as the y-axis and the x-axis down here, it's showing you that multiplication as far as how it comes out and creates that. I don't know if anybody in this group has read any of the novels that I wrote, but I do a lot of theoretical work with resonant frequencies based on Fibonacci numbers. Anyway, this is showing how this works in economic healing or prosperity. Let's go ahead and start at the on the way down and work our way up. Let's say that we are feeling like we're a failure, but we are, like the drill sergeant said, do something even if it's wrong. So we make a mistake, and the mistakes turn into better but imperfect actions because we persist and continue to keep trying, and out of faith we wind up being able to have learning take place, and out of the learning we no longer have failures, we go into a success. Now, you've heard of a vicious cycle. That was a vicious cycle that goes into a upward spiral. It also works in the other way. All of a sudden, like my father was a great success as an engineer, and then all of a sudden he began to lose faith and he wasn't able to get a job, and then it seemed like he fell back onto the failures of feeling like he was no good. And so you can have a vicious cycle that's going all the way down just as easily as you can have one that goes up. But I suggest that we go ahead and try the upside more than you want to do with the down. But I like showing this because even nature is representative of how things are supposed to work in spiritual laws. Another of the prosperity pundits, P.D. Jakes out there. If you can't figure out your purpose, figure out your passion, for your passion will lead you right into your purpose. Here's where you can start looking at my wife, Stephanie Schroeder, on there to see what kind of face she makes, because this story has to do with her. My wife happens to be a very talented artist. And she felt like for the longest time that that was what she was going to do for her whole life. And she did. She went out there and she was able to get jobs in which she was using her art, not necessarily in such a creative way. So she would make signs and she would make stickers and logos and all kinds of things like that. But the problem is that it was really an underpaid industry that she was in. I mean, not everybody is, Rembrandt and Michelangelo or whatever getting paid for the artwork that they put together. And so she realized, gosh, I could go work at In-N-Out Burger and make as much money as I'm making as in being an artist. And what that brings up is the question is a lot of us feel like the universe owes us a living doing what brings us the greatest joy. I don't know if I go back to economics for a moment, they actually have a really good example of what's called supply and demand curves. And you go, if I have this supply and I have this demand going here, wherever those two things meet, right there in the middle is where everybody is the happiest. Both the customer and the seller wind up being happy right where those points cross there. And where I would put those 2 points is what brings you the greatest happiness and what does society need of all of the talents that you have a passion for? So in her life, she goes, I've been an artist my whole life. And so she puts is just looking for entry level positions to take. And she managed to get a job as a receptionist at an art school. So there was kind of a happy thing right there. Within 6 months, she was the assistant to the president, and then she wound up being the registrar for the school shortly thereafter. And she made quite a living for herself being the registrar, not only for them. In fact, I'll have more of that story later on. But as she continued on in that direction, even though she may have wanted to be, her passion was truly in art, she loved being able to help all these young people and to be able to get them so that they could have a degree and go out and follow their dreams. So she found what she had a passion for that may not have been an artist, but was something that she had a particular talent for, and wound up being where those two curves come together and you find that point right in the middle. So it was a win-win for society and for my wife, Stephanie. I couldn't find a better way to say this, so I quoted myself. Sorry about that. I did write a book on this. It's called The Price of Prosperity, and so I lifted this out of there. What keeps us entrapped on the earth? Fear, guilt, shame, emptiness, despair, anger, rage, and apathy. These are what we trade off for ultimate happiness. So instead of being happy, we decide we like it better when we are fearful and guilty and shamed and so on. Those fruits of selfishness are always with us when we deny our true nature as beloved souls, created in the perfect image of God. So if I go back to the that quote that came from Marianne Williamson of who are you to be talented, gorgeous, fabulous, etc., and who are you actually not to be, this is kind of an application of what we're talking about there in terms of if we aren't all of those wonderful things, what are we trading our happiness for? We get to be fearful and guilty and shamed and so on. So if you can put it down into these terms, I find that this kind of thing is helpful to be able to motivate us to go, I need to quit being fearful. I need to quit being angry. I need to quit blaming other people for what's going on with me and start asking the better questions of how can I use this situation to my advantage? How can I become a better person as a result of dealing with this properly? Okay, so now we're going into finding prosperity not through self-esteem. I just finished that. I'm going into how do you become prosperous when it comes to actual money or wealth? So, what is wealth? I've got a couple of stories that have to do with where I really started to get a handle on how to be truly prosperous in life. I understood the rules of it, but then I started to create a structure whereby I was able to start becoming prosperous. And so there was a gentleman that hired me, and I'll go into the reason why he hired me in a second, but he hired me to be a general manager of a shopping center that he had. And I remember we were coming up on like a Memorial Day weekend, and we had gone out to lunch together, and he asked me, he goes, what are you going to do this 3-day weekend? And I said, oh, this was in California. I said, I'm going to go back to, my spiritual home, which is Scottsdale, Arizona. I don't know how many of you know Herb and Ann Purrier, but they were running the Logo Center over there at the time. So I had already lived in Arizona at that point, and I was very involved with the Logo Center, and I loved the game of racquetball. So I had a lot of racquetball friends, and I let them know that. I said I was going to go back and play racquetball all weekend, and I was the Logo Center was having a party, and so we were going to attend that as well. And I said, "What are you doing?" And you can see the word down there, helo skiing. I had never heard of helo skiing, but apparently, when you're wealthy enough, you can get your own helicopter to take you to the top of the mountain that nobody else can go on, and you ski down to your own mountain chalet cabin that's all yours, and in the unadulterated snow. And I'm looking at him, my mouth kind of drops. I go, wow, that sounds like something. I'm not a skier, but that just sounds, if you are, it sounds ideal. And he goes, oh, you're kidding. I said, no. He said, he goes, I've got to tell you, I really admire your quality of life. And I was looking at him like, what? And I found out the guy was worth about $200 million. I mean, he's a very wealthy individual. And I said, I've never been helo skiing. What are you talking about quality of life? And he goes, once you get enough money, everybody you meet wants a piece of it. He goes, you have a real problem having any real friends again after you get that. And I said, wait a minute, wait a minute. I know that there are some friends that you have that you say are even wealthier than you. And he goes, and he smiled and he goes, even they want to figure out how to make use of my money, even if they have more. And I was like, oh my gosh, that really hurt me as far as looking at it going, what an awful life to have to sit there and think you could never get a friend again after you become uber wealthy. Well, here's another interesting part of this as far as why he hired me. He happened to be a landlord to Stephanie and I in a business that we had, and we had run into some tough financial times at that point. And I had to call him up and say, we're not going to be able to pay the rent and we're doing our best here. And can you work with me on this? And the thing that he asked me for was a P&L or an income statement that showed how much money was coming in, how much expenses were going out to show him exactly where we were. Well, the interesting thing is I had already learned about tithing at that point. This story will come up again as far as the lesson that I had to learn, because even though I was tithing, I was having economic healing problems at that time. I send in the P&L and it's showing that I am tithing 10% of our gross income on it instead of paying him rent. And I can just, I'm going, the next phone call I get from this guy is probably going to be screaming. And interestingly enough, he didn't. He goes, I'm an atheist. He goes, but I don't have a problem with you doing that. He goes, if that's what you really feel, is needed in order to be able to make this work. He goes, I understand. He was Jewish, by the way. And so he had definitely understood the biblical directives on what is it, Malachi 3:10. Bring tithes into the warehouse and I will pour you out a blessing as you could not hold it. So you wind up having him understanding what I was doing, but not believing in God or that tithing actually works. But he was okay with me doing it, even if I wasn't paying him the rent. Let's just say that all that did resolve and I was able to work it out with him and get him paid back. But the interesting thing was, why did he hire me? A couple of years down the road, he manages to find, I moved from California back to Arizona. He manages to track me down and calls me out of the blue and says, would you come back and run this shopping center that I now own? And And I asked him when we had gone out to lunch and had already made the agreement that I would do the job. I said, Why in the world did you call me?" And he goes, "Well, I watched you enough with the things that you were doing." He goes, "You know what you're doing on the business side. You know what you're doing in advertising, marketing. You have a great relationship with the city, and this is a big enough shopping center that we had their attention." And he goes, "The thing that I was most worried about is that business probably handled $200,000 in cash a month in the tenants coming in, most of them paid in cash." And he goes, "If you're going to live at home with your mother and not pay your rent so that you can tithe," he goes, "you're never going to wind up being able to." I'm sorry, my phone went off right there. I said, "If you are right there, having she and I had to move back in with my mom in order to be able to pay the bills and all that, and I'm tithing and not paying the rent." He goes, "There's no way you're going to steal any money from me." So it was interesting that he had a whole different concept of what was important to him. I want somebody that not only has the talent, but that I can absolutely trust, even if I'm an atheist and he is atheist. So it's interesting to see how that worked out. Another Casey reading, 3654-1. The ability to, now, this is a woman that was talking about recipes. So if you're wondering what this looks like on here, didn't know whether to be a chef or how she was going to be prosperous. So she had her own special recipes, and you'll see how this unfolds. The ability to be a good cook arises from those activities under whatever may be the environment, and you have recipes all your own. Keep them and give them away if you would keep them. For remember, you can never lose anything that really belongs to you, and you can't keep that which belongs to someone else. No matter if this is spiritual, mental, or material, the law is the same. Now, that's my emphasis as far as the bolding and underline. You can never lose anything that really belongs to you. That's the whole point right here. Now, the anecdote or application of this, as I had told the guy, his name was Les, and I had told Les that I would give him about 3 years, and then I definitely wanted to leave the shopping center, move back to Arizona, because I considered it my spiritual home. I really didn't want to leave Arizona when I did the first time, but it felt right at that point. And he said, "Fine, with the 3 years." Well, it got into the fourth year, and I started to see, you know what, the problem is he was paying me very well, and he even admitted it. Yeah, I remember I was at a social gathering one time, and they were talking about what does it take to keep good people, and he says, "I find overpaying them works really well." And so I said, "Oh, so I'm overpaid, is that?" And it was funny, but it was also very revealing as far as what was going on in his head for that. And so when I finally went to him and said, "You know what, I'm going to give you a year's notice, but I'm leaving. I need to go back to my spiritual home." And his first effort was to start being even more generous and more generous. And he goes, "Do you want to stay here yet? Would you like some more money? Would you want to stay here yet?" And I mean, he did things like paid for, he went to a 2-week trip to Egypt and Israel and got to do all these wonderful things. And he just paid for the whole thing. I mean, he was being so generous with that. And I said, "I can't thank you enough. This is life changing what I've been able to do with what you've done for me here. But I still really need, as much as you understand about me being a spiritual individual, I need to go back to my spiritual home." Well, this is where I ran into something on his end of the world. He so much valued money that he felt, as I was rejecting the money, that I was rejecting him. And it started to turn ugly between us. And it really didn't go well at the end, as far as I'm going, okay, yeah, there were things that I was supposed to be paid in like perpetuity of things that had happened at that shopping center that, it wouldn't have been huge amounts of money, but I would have had maybe $3,000 a month for the rest of my life, even though I was only about 40 years old at that time, and I was free to go work and do whatever I wanted over and above that. And he started saying, "I'm not giving that to you, and you can sue me if you want." He was an attorney, by the way, so I would have lost. And So I'm looking at it going, okay, I'm just going to have to up and cut and run and go and start all over again instead of, having a really big nest egg and income stream built up. And that's exactly what I wound up doing. I left at the end of in 6 months as opposed to 12, just because it was getting so tense. And then I came out to Arizona again, and long story short there, that was in 97, wound up getting into the mortgage business. Now, I can tell you, here's a good adage. If you're going to sell something expensive. And I can't think of anything more expensive than the mortgage that you get on your home. That was really working well. So I got into the mortgage business, and it was very good to me, and allowed me to retire in, gosh, 2006. And what was I then? 51. So by the way, the phone just quit ringing then because of the banking industry blowing up and all that stuff. But good enough. I had done well enough that I could retire completely by that time, though my wife continued to work so we could have benefits. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I'm hearing yeah in the back. But here's the interesting part of that. It was within 6 months of the time that I had left California, coming out to Arizona, that I was making more money than I had from the Anaheim marketplace, where I was being overpaid by less. When it says you can never lose anything that really belongs to you, that's exactly what happened. We came out here, and all of a sudden, it didn't take years and years and years to build it up. I was all of a sudden blowing and going in a very, very quick, short amount of time. Another Cayce reading, 263-4. The question is, what can I do to help the financial condition of my family? The answer, remove any thought or purpose or cause of anxiety for self from the others, and there will be made the harmonious experiences that will aid self and others in making for the necessary material activities in the experience. So she's saying, how do I bring more money into the family? It says, you need to get anxiety out. And he used that one word to be able to talk about all the other, when I was talking about fear, guilt, shame, blah, 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 he's using anxiety to be a catch-all for all of that. So if you are feeling any anxiety at all, go ahead and take that out of your thought process. So here comes the story of how I wound up tithing originally. My wife and I owned and operated a no alcohol teenage nightclub and got into it in 1981, and had a partner at that time. And I can tell you things weren't working out with a partner, and so I asked to be able to break up the partnership, and with kind of hard feelings over the whole thing. So then we had as soon as I took the place over, it started to do terrible. I mean, it was going along just fine. And then as soon as we split up the partnership, it was like, oh my gosh, this thing just fell apart despite my best efforts. And I kept doing everything I could. And this is when I really got back into, you heard me mention a Napoleon Hill, Catherine Ponder in particular, got the circulating file on economic healing from the Edgar Cayce readings. And both Stephanie and I just studied these things and started implementing them. For instance, you go ahead and write this prosperity mantra, if you will, on a label and put it on an envelope that's talking about, I give thanks for my ability to be able to pay these bills and to prosper the people that the money goes to. It was longer than that, but you get the idea. And so all the bills that we had to pay would go into this envelope, and we would pray over the thing, and especially pray over the envelopes with the checks in them before we mailed out the payments and all. So that was one. We were constantly doing praying and cleansing, with sage and crystals and all that within the nightclub itself, and morning meditations without fail to be able to focus in on prosperity for ourselves. And all I can say is that it didn't help. Things were still going very poorly for us right then. And I really got to the point where I said, I'm not sure we can make it another month. And the last thing that we had not done was tithing. And so I'm looking at it going, well, we haven't got any money right now. And he said, but you know what? It always talks about in tithing that you should be a cheerful giver, that you should be able to give from your heart without fear and have faith that everything is going to work out. I'm afraid my lack of fear and faith was the fact of this place is doomed and I'm not going to be able to pay all the bills anyway. So why don't I just go ahead and write a tithing check out of it until I'm not around anymore? Kind of an interesting plan. And frankly, because I was supporting the Logo Center and the ARE at the time. So we take this money and be able to send it out there. Now, here comes the other part of it. When you have a paycheck, it's real easy to say, this is my gross income and this is my net income. Which one do I get the 10% on? Now, when you have a business and you go, here's my gross income, and my net income is a negative number, and I don't think I'm going to get a check in the mail from God that's 10% of that, I have only one number to be able to tie 10% of, and that's on the gross income. Since I was doomed anyway, is the way my mind was working, I went ahead and wrote 10% checks to places that we felt spiritually nurtured from in order to be able to do it off of the gross. And oddly enough, we kept faltering along for about 6 more months. I mean, somehow we were just able to get enough money to be able to, pay for pay the bills to keep the payroll going and the lights on and the rent paid. So people weren't throwing us out, but we weren't getting anywhere. I mean, we weren't getting any checks ourselves. So what happened at the end of 6 months is when I looked at it and I said, okay, God, what is going on here? How can I wind up giving away 10% of the gross income of this company when I thought I was doomed in 30 days and I'm still here? And I realized that I had created a catch-22 for myself. What did I say? I can give with joy in my heart, write these checks because this business is doomed. How about I change that in my mind where I can write these 10% checks with joy in my heart and I am going to prosper over and above that? That was a tremendous mind shift to be able to go from the idea of I'm not going to be here next month and that's and so it doesn't matter whether I do this or not, to everything is not only going to be able to send that money out and do that much good, but I'm going to prosper over and above it. And long story short, it worked. We started to prosper as never before in that business. Next Cayce reading 451-1 is one that I think we should all pay attention to, even the ARE. It says, how much should she give of her earning capacity to charity? The answer, 10% is all should. Now, knowing that probably most people here are Cayce pundits, how often do you get an answer from Cayce that is that clear, that doesn't say this should be determined by the individual and that is a unique circumstance? You would get into a lot of verbiage like that from the Cayce readings anytime they're trying to nail something like this down. This one came back 10% as all should, and the tithing actually was from the reports or index. It was showing what the biblical references were there for Dorothy and I. This is where I have borrowed from some other places, because Cayce doesn't talk about this so directly as in tithing being 10%, but it's 10% of your time, your talent, and your treasure. They call that the 4 T's of tithing. So we understand the treasure part, that you can write a check for 10% of your income. 10% of your time. Most people understand that as in you would donate time to volunteer organizations, kind of like what the contemporary Cayce of Canada folks are doing here. So when you put your time in volunteer to be able to be of service to other people, that makes sense. But what does it mean to do it in talent? And I was probably the largest Unity Church in in the United States is one that I was executive director for a number of years here in Phoenix. It was Unity of Phoenix. And I remember that we did a Feed the Multitudes, in which we would go out and we would get a whole bunch of, hamburgers and condiments and lettuce, tomatoes, buns, and all of that. And all of the people would volunteer from the church, would volunteer their time to go down into a homeless area and do a great big cookout of giving people, the burgers and all that in order to make sure that they were fed. And there was one guy that was there as I was kind of checking it all out, because it was the first one that I had been to. And the guy, his name was Barry. And I saw Barry, and he was kind of ostracized, that he didn't really fit in with everybody. And they had him in the back and he was bringing out the condiments and refilling the bottles and doing all that stuff. And I started talking to him and I found out that Barry was kind of a high up manager in one of the grocery store chains called Bash's out here. And he was in charge of one of the food departments. And I said, wow. I said, really, what about talking to Bashas? I'd love to go with you if you can set it up, talking to Bashas about them donating the food that we're having to pay for. The church was doing its own tithing. And so we were taking our tithing money, and instead of going someplace else, we'd buy the food to be able to feed the multitudes. And he goes, oh, you don't even need to show up. I'll just go ahead and talk to him and I'll get that done. And forevermore, Barry was a much more popular guy when he started showing up with a $1,500 of food for free. And that's where you want to start talking about the ability of how do you donate your talent? He was donating his time by doing the condiments, but it was so much better to take what God had given him, the position, the talents that he had, to be able to say, you could have hired somebody for $15 an hour to do what I was doing back there, but I'm going to bring you $1,500 of food and to be able to give you, that much more freedom to do this. So understanding that time, the talent, and treasure is all a part of what we should be doing. Is that 10% of 24 hours in a day? No, I consider if it's a work week and you have a 40-hour work week, that tithing of your time being 4 volunteer hours a week is probably a good measure. And talent, that's harder to come up with. But if you follow what I'm talking about, the opportunities will arrive, and that's how you fill them. Cayce reading 520-1. How much money must the entity accumulate to enable him to comfortably provide for his family, etc.? Once again, it comes right back with the use that thou hast in hand. And he that will not contribute to the humanitarian interest with 1 penny above the needed from day to day will not contribute were there millions at hand. This is the truth. So you wind up saying, if somebody is, I think I had the statistic later on. I looked it up for this talk. Do you know that they have done studies of the people that win a lottery of $1 million or more? 70% of them within a few years declare bankruptcy. Think on that one a second. 70% of the people that were handed $1 million or more are the ones that wind up having to declare bankruptcy because they really don't have a concept of money, of prosperity, of how to be able to be a good steward of what God gives to you. And winning the lottery is a great opportunity to teach you that, oh, I was doing better when I didn't declare bankruptcy before I had the million plus. There's another way to look at this as well. And my wife was there with me in a study group in which this woman named Susan was she had been coming to the group regularly every week for a couple of years. And then she walked in one day and the woman was absolutely in tears. And actually, I'd met her in college. And she had 3 teenage daughters. She didn't work. She was a housewife without a job. And her husband worked for a Ford, I think. So he's made a good living for Ford. All of a sudden, the husband comes home to her that day and said, I was laid off by Ford. And by the way, I'm leaving to go live with a girl in a trailer someplace. And she's 20 years old and he's like 45. And he goes, good luck with the daughters. They had 3 daughters, as I said, all in their teens. And she comes in, she goes, I have no idea what I'm going to be able to do. There's just no money. We're going to lose the house. And I can't get through school to be able to earn. She really was in bad straits. And we were trying to remind her of all of the concepts within the Cayce readings that she'd been studying for the past couple of years. And I'll tone down her language a little bit, but after we kept going at her for about 10 minutes with that, she goes, forget all that crap. This is reality. I think my jaw dropped open. I don't know what Stephanie's reaction was, but I was like, holy cow, you can come to this group for 2 years like this and talk the talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, this is all crap instead of the reality she was facing at the moment. Well, what's interesting is that I ran into her about 15 years later. And amazingly enough, she had managed to finish school. Her daughters were all out and married and happily getting along in life. and she got a master's degree in family counseling and had a really good job with the county. And she, had developed a savings that she felt comfortable with to be able to retire in a number of years and so on. And then I finally asked, I said, "Oh, well, how's the love life gone since then?" And she goes, "Oh, I've dated a lot of men, but they're all interested in my money, much more than they are in me." And I'm like, "Oh goodness." What had happened? She was so devastated back then. First of all, she doesn't trust men anymore as a class because of what the one that she had given her heart to that whole time and had raised a family with, and then felt like she got burned. Then she manages to pull herself up by her bootstraps, but you hear that saying that where your treasure lies, there will your heart be also. Well, her treasure lay in being able to take care of herself financially and not rely on somebody else in order to be able to do that. And so, as well as she had been able to pick herself up financially, she had not been able to fill her heart again. She had not been able to find someone that she trusted to be able to have that one-on-one personal relationship with it was so fulfilling before all of that had happened to her. So I say if you don't really have your act together beforehand and understanding what true prosperity is all about in terms of a balance of health, wealth, and relationships, that you're going to get challenged at some point where you get to be able to figure that out. 232-2. As to the financial, in this we find there has been and is some distress to the mental faculties of this entity. So they're pretty upset about their financial situation. These we find will, in the early fall, adjust themselves to the needs, wishes, and desires of this entity. Let this mind be kept ever in the mental forces of this entity, that the best comes to him or her who serves best. So you can see I've bolded and underlined that last part there. It's not just, okay, I'm going to go work in the food bank, for a few hours this weekend because that's what I'm supposed to do. How, how about having an attitude, I get to go down to the food bank and be of great service to my fellow humans out there in something that is so necessary, so fundamental, as to be able to make sure they've got food on the table. So one of the concepts that I think people have trouble with is they keep feeling like, well, I did this wrong or I did that wrong, and that's going to, for that reason, I don't deserve to be prosperous. I should describe that little thing down there at the bottom where it says game of murder ball in junior high. Murder ball. You could never do this game in this day and age. When it rained back I was in junior high school, that was when they brought out this inflated 6-foot canvas ball, and they put it on the 50-yard line of the football field, and it's raining, so we're all getting soaked out there. And then the coach divides the PE class, so we got like 50 people, 100 people, 50 on each side on a 40-yard line with a ball in the center of us. The coach blows a whistle, and there are no rules from that point on other than each team is trying to roll the ball over the opponent's goal. Now, you can imagine when he blows the whistle and you have 100 kids converging on this murder ball and they just smash into the thing, and it's inflated, so a lot of times you're bouncing back or whatever, that you have what I really get in my head with this is the various prosperity vectors that we have in our life. We have the things that we're doing well, and that we're going to the food bank and we have a good attitude about this, but then maybe we were going through a divorce and we really have a problem with our spouse and the way we're trying to resolve money and who should get what. So, or you have a problem at work, and so you have those negative things. So on one side, you have all the positive things that are in harmony with God's loving ways, trying to push this ball over the goal line, and all these negative things pushing the other way. Now, let me tell you what happens. A lot of times, the ball's not moving anywhere because they just push and push and push, and nobody goes. But then somebody gets the bright idea, and boy, you sure didn't want to be the littlest kid out there in the field, because a couple of big guys had grabbed the littlest kid and tossed him over the top of the ball so he'd land on the people that were pushing it, and it would all knock him down, make him fall down, and then whoever threw the kid over the ball then starts pushing over the top of him and trampling the people. Now you see why I say you can't do this game these days. Did anybody get hurt out there? I think a better question is, did anyone not get hurt? But we all loved it. So that's the kind of upbringing I had. Huh? Answers a lot of questions there. But again, I'm talking about all of the vectors that are converging on this ball is just like the best and the worst of us converging on whatever the goal is. In this case, prosperity, of trying to get it to move in one direction or another, or not at all. So if it seems like we're stuck there in the middle, then if you can think of the murder ball example, you've got a really good metaphor in your mind for how that works. One of the things in the Search for God material, if you are in a study group in the Search for God books, actually talks about prosperity from the idea of how come spiritual people are not more successful. And it said, especially when you look at something like the mafia. I'm using my own words on this, but when you have people that have less than loving intentions out there, how is it that the mafia is so successful? I mean, it earns lots of money. Well, the thing is that they are supplying a need. Remember, we have our supply and demand curves right there, and there is part of society that says, I really do want to, whether it's drugs, alcohol, prostitution, gambling, whatever the vice happens to be, they're meeting a need that's within society. Not necessarily a good one, but that's what they do. And so there's so much money that is being put into this. The mafia is successful financially. I don't know about longevity. I don't know about how happy their relationships are, how much faith and joy and that sort of thing. If you ever watch any of the movies that have to do with a casino and oh gosh, the same actors were in another movie, but when you see all of those mafia types together, they don't live long and they don't have a lot of happiness in their life. So it's almost like the woman Susan, who wound up being able to take care of herself financially, but was never able to find joy again. That's what the trade-offs are when you wind up putting so much emphasis on one thing. This is one of the work readings, if you're familiar with the 254 series. So this is Edgar Cayce giving a reading for the ARE, telling the ARE how to deal with it. In consideration of the fact that Edgar Cayce is devoting his entire time to the work, give the reason for his not being able to obtain sufficient financial support for him and his family's material sustenance, and how may he, Edgar Cayce, correct this condition? Answer, live closer to him who giveth all good and perfect gifts. And ask, and ye shall receive. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Give, and it shall be returned fourfold. Give, 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 if you would receive. There has never been the lack of necessities, neither will there be, so long as adhering to the Lord's way is kept first and foremost. Now, this is not something that comes out of the Cayce material, but kind of does, is incarnation just prior to coming in as Edgar Cayce was with the last name of Bainbridge. And he was not exactly a Messiah example at that particular point. He used his psychic abilities to, win at gambling or get over on women or whatever, vice that you want to talk about that he may have been involved in back at that time. It was not a great incarnation for him. And I wondered if there wasn't some kind of a karmic reaction that is much of that he needed to focus so much on the service that he was doing this time, because he could have become distracted if he wound up having more money than it took to be able to meet his needs. So there was one part, that's one part of it. I can tell you that I had I'll just call him a wacky chiropractor that my mother had recommended that I go out and talk to him and get an adjustment from it. And he was able to answer questions psychically, kind of like Edgar did and other psychics, that if you'd ask him that, he would be able to, in working with your spine and moving your feet, etc., he would come up with answers for there. This is when I was going through all my prosperity problems with the no alcohol nightclub. And I had gone through a number of opportunities to be able to become fairly wealthy if they would have worked out. And I said, how come I keep having these things come up where they just don't work out? And he goes, because you decided to find God this incarnation. You have had a number of incarnations where you have been very wealthy and you get distracted by it. And you are pretty much standing in your own way as far as becoming prosperous in this particular lifetime until you can overcome that block where the money comes to you and it doesn't dissuade you. And that was one reason why I retired as early as I did. I said, if I start doing other things, I'm going to get put in that area instead of being able to give talks like this one. So it really did make a big difference in where I was coming from. And as soon as I got over that block, prosperity started to come to me. That other note down there, it says ARE board level of concern, was when I was on the ARE board the first time. This is my second term on there, and this was from 1985 to 1990. And during that time, in fact, 1987, they had a kind of a stock market crash, which everything went south. During that time, right when I was in the middle of my tenure on the board, and I was on the finance committee at that time. But here's what happened on the last day of that particular meeting, when everything had kind of gone to hell in a handbasket. Charles Thomas Casey was in charge of the thing at the time, and he takes all of us in the room and he goes, "Okay, we have all these whiteboards here, and I want everybody to tell me what their concerns are about the ARE at this time." And so he starts writing them up on the whiteboard. And well, let's say that we wound up with 20, 25 of them up there. And then he goes ahead and says, now I want to point to each one of these things. And he has 3 other whiteboards. And he goes, this whiteboard is for low priorities. This whiteboard is for medium priorities. This whiteboard is for high priorities. And he said, fine. And so we started divvying them up according to how we felt as a board of what the priority we should give to all of those concerns. I'm going to cut to the chase on this and talk about finances, because there we were having some of the tougher financial challenges that we had in a long time in that organization at that point. So lucky that I get to be back here again for that. For this, I was born, I guess. Anyway, he has this finance, and we put it as a medium priority. And I could just tell when we said, yeah, it's a medium priority, and he puts it up there, then he brings up the staff's low, medium, and high priorities on there, and finances was an absolute high priority. So the board was not nearly as shook out of all this as was the staff, is really what the bottom line is. I'm going to divert just a moment into something that is so demonstrative. If you're familiar with Herb Puryear, he was spiritual education director for the ARE for more than a decade. And then he moved out here, and I got to know he and his wife, Ann Puryear, very well. In fact, they lived across the street from us for 20 years, maybe. Anyway, we wind up having, when you're talking about your finances and all that, they came out to that teen nightclub before we had actually moved here to Arizona. But we knew who they were, and we were supporting them with our tithing. And so they wanted to see this teen nightclub. And I don't know if you know Ann, but Ann was probably one of the more talented aura readers that I'd ever met. And so every time I'd see her, I'd probably drive her nuts going, what about this? What about that? Can you see auras here? And what does the aura look like? Blah, blah. And so as I was talking to her just about the nightclub, Herb became fascinated, and he walks inside and he starts walking to the dance floor where all the kids were dancing. And I stopped Ann right where I said, can you tell me what color the auras are, the kids that are dancing out there? And she looked at it. It didn't take her half a second to say, it's absolutely red. A shared red amongst all of them. It is just pure energy being used up out there on the dance floor. But they have plenty of it, so don't worry about it. And then it occurred to me, and I said, what about Herb Puryear? Your own husband's walking toward that dance floor. I said, what's his aura look like? And she goes, well, and then she literally just stopped. And then she kind of moves forward, and she goes, he was unaffected. And then the closer he got to the dance floor, the redder his aura turned. And by the time he got up to the railing, he didn't get out there on the floor and start, doing bust a move or whatever, but he got up to the railing and his aura was absolutely red, in resonance with all of the kids that were out there as he was experiencing what they were, from his third person point of view. And then all of a sudden he looked at it and was enjoying it. And then he came back out, and I said, is his aura changing now? And she goes, yep, it's going back to what it was. Boy, this is an important lesson, because what we're talking about here is that Herb, I mean, he's probably one of the more spiritual people and definitely one of the great pundits of the Edgar Cayce readings. As he was getting within proximity of that, it's like this birds of a feather. Who do we hang out with? Even if your mindset is in the correct place, you can't help but to be affected by the people that you hang out in or associating with. And so it's only when you get into that still small voice of your own and you get back out on your own that you become who you are again. So there's a definite lesson there. The ARE staff all hang around each other and they have a high level of concern about finances. When we have that third party, a lot of faith, we're not so panicked about the whole thing. We saw it as a medium concern. So I think there's a tremendous lesson in both of those things as far as how the staff and board saw it in 1987 and what happened with Herb and his wherever relative to the dancers out there. Another work reading, 254-105. Would it be wise to advance the general membership the proposal of the Norfolk trustees that 10% of income for 3 months be contributed? Now, in this case, they were trying to figure out how do we get the study groups that are opening up in the fledgling time that they were in right then, saying, how do we get money from the study groups into the ARE headquarters? And the answer was, be wise to indicate this as a way in which certain groups are aiding in the program. But as to whether this plan should be accepted or rejected, leave that open. Okay, so if you go out there and you start trying to say, this is how we should receive money from you people, you need to do it this way. I think that really works against you. And I have this is the lesson. Remember when I said when I had already been tithing 10% on the gross for a few years, and I wound up having another financial challenge in the same business, even though I continue to do that. Well, this is where we get to catch up with the story of John and Stephanie in 1987-88. And that is, we were the only teenage nightclub in town. We were doing really well. And all of a sudden, a $3 million teenage nightclub opens up about a mile east from our location, and it was called Disneyland. They opened up a place inside called Videopolis. And that's truly what it was a teenage nightclub, because they would have bands and dancing and DJs and all that stuff. And the worst part of it was that was the same year that Disney released what was called the annual pass. And for $99, you could go to Disneyland any day you wanted for the next year. That became one of the most popular Christmas presents that parents got for their teenage kids, especially with Videopolis opening. And it was almost devastating overnight from the time that that place opened up. And it was killing us. I mean, we at one point we were sitting there, having 800-900 people come through the door in one night, and then we're down to 150. I mean, it was that quick. And it was devastating, to the point where we started reinforcing all of the things that we had done before when we turned the nightclub business around before, and continuing to do the tithing. But here's what I was experiencing. I found out that some tremendous expenses were being delayed. For instance, I'm supposed to pay the property taxes for the property, and I disputed. I said, "Oh my God, they raised it." And so I disputed the property taxes, and while I'm in dispute, you don't have to pay it. And I even got them lowered later on when it finally came, before a judge or their arbitrator. And so I kept me from having to pay this really big property tax bill while we did that. Here's another one. I had a whole lot of call it the technical equipment for the nightclub that I had leased. And I couldn't make the lease payments right at the time that the leasing company that had loaned me the money sold my contract to somebody else. And I couldn't make the payments anymore. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's a nightclub going to look like without any equipment? Well, here's what happened. Because they sold it to the other company, this other company goes, you're not making payments to me. We don't accept that you sold it to us. And this company goes, you're not making payments. We don't want them back. And so nobody, even if I tried to make a payment, a partial payment or something, neither one of them wanted it in order in order to make sure that they weren't the person holding the bag on this thing that they thought they were going to have to foreclose and go get the equipment from. So I just give you those two examples of things that are going, but didn't the money have to be paid eventually? And the answer is yes, but not while I was trying to learn the lesson that was going on here. Because this time I got so close to bankruptcy that I literally had made an appointment 2 days hence from when I called the attorney to declare bankruptcy and actually file it. I said, I'm toast. I don't have any ability to keep this going anymore. And the day after I had done that, in the mail comes a check for the amount of money that I had as a business plan to be able to turn the place around. I've been approached by a couple of guys that were the older teenagers that have been coming to the club, and they go, obviously you need some help here, and we've got a plan to do that for you. Both of them were very popular, and they're going, if everybody thinks we bought this club, we can go out there and promote this club and get everybody to go, hey, I know the owner. And you don't want to know me. I'm an old gray hair guy, right? But if you have these other guys who are like, oh, look at these really hip, cool, young kids, and they own the club, and they were out there just promoting the heck out of this thing with flyers. And it really did turn around as you just couldn't believe it, that once they were able to do that. What did I need? I needed to be able to change the name of the club to get away from the old name and just do enough of a change to the inside that it was a facelift on the whole place. Luckily, if you happen to remember, my wife's an outstanding artist, and she went in there and just did an amazing job with paint, which didn't cost very much. But in order to replace the carpet and to be able to change the signage out front, we needed $15,000 in order to be able to pull that off. All of a sudden in the mail comes a check for $15,300 on the day before I'm supposed to go declare bankruptcy. And I'm looking at it, and it came from the insurance company. And I'm going, why is the insurance company sending me money? Because I had to cancel my liability insurance. I wasn't that worried about it because we were what you call uncollectible. In other words, if they sued us, even if we were wrong, there wasn't any money to get, even if I didn't have insurance. So I wasn't all that worried about it. And we hadn't been had any problems over there anyway, especially when you don't have much attendance. So anyway, this money comes in, and I'm looking at it, and I read the letter that goes along with it. And they had audited our books, and the amount of premium that we were supposed to pay for the insurance was based on the previous year when we were doing really well. But it was based on a percentage of our income. So I kept paying the higher percentage for the previous year, and I'd forgotten all about that. I just thought that's what my set premium is. And when they did an audit of the books, they found out, oh, you've overpaid us $15,300 in insurance premiums because you're doing poorly on the attendance compared to last year. Here's your refund. Thank you very much. Good doing business with you. And so I wound up getting the money, unlike what I was telling God that whole time. God, my attendance has to go up. My income has to go up. Remember back in the ARE saying, how are we going to get more money in order, or say, how are we going to get, let's get the study groups to, contribute 10% of their income for 3 months, et cetera, just like it says in the reading above there. I was trying to tell God, you have to do it this. God, how else you can keep delaying all these expenses, but I'm going to have to pay them someday. You've got to make the attendance go up in order to make this thing happen. Well, guess what? God showed me I was wrong and said, the attendance is going down. That's how you're getting your money to change this. That was a hell of a lesson. It really was. 262 are the Search for God readings, and the question here is our lack of material necessities due to the fact that we have not first sought the kingdom, or lack of faith in not speaking the word? A, both. For what saith the law? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all things shall be added unto thee thou hast need of, which includes letting God help you as he wants to instead of how you're telling him to. Most of us think we need a great deal more than we do. Well, apparently I could survive that devastating number of months in which the attendance had gone down when I thought I was doing everything right, but God knew how to get that $15,000 to me at a point. It wasn't the 15,000 that made the difference. It was the lesson that it taught me. And it said, the lesson you are not going to get unless it happens to you this way, the exact opposite of what you think you need in order to be able to turn this around. It's just an anecdote to be able to illustrate that last point. Most of us think we need a great deal more than we do. If you remember Ripley's Believe It or Not, there's a story about a guy he was the sole heir of the family fortune, which was apparently tremendous, but he was kind of a ne'er-do-well, and he went on for years just spending, 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 not paying any attention to, how do you bring in more prosperity for himself and others. And he finally got called in by his attorney and said, I'm afraid you're down to $100,000 when you were worth millions. And the guy took it so poorly, he literally went out and committed suicide. He didn't know how he could live if all he had left in the world was $100,000 and he had to go to work and be a responsible individual, blah, blah, blah. He literally killed himself over that. And he didn't leave a will. And so they go through the legal process of saying, what is the next living relative to be able to leave that money to? And apparently it was some distant cousin who had no clue that he was related to wealth at any point in his life. In fact, he was homeless. And when they found him, they said, you have inherited $100,000. He had a heart attack and died because he couldn't imagine having that much wealth be a part of his life at that point. So if you want to talk about having the same exact thing be seen as this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, of how can I, I'm going to die and go to heaven here because I've received that kind of money. Just an amazing perspective on wealth. 137-125. Well, that's got a, Blumenthal would indicate that that's why there's such a high reading number there. So take this and keep it with thee in thy heart and in thine mind always. With power of money, with position and wealth comes greater responsibility. But ye know in whom ye believed, and he is able to keep you against that day. Now I mentioned this earlier, that I actually looked this up as I was putting the quotes together that I wanted to use for this talk, that the scientific studies of $1 million plus lottery winners, 70% of them go bankrupt within a few years. And if you go in and actually read the stories of the individual, they go, oh, it's a horrible thing that I won that lottery. I wish it never happened to me, because I'd figured out how to take very little money and be able to have a quality of life as I was, being able to get by. But once I had that, everybody was coming up and everybody wanted money, and I was spending way too much of it, and blah, 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 So it was the worst thing that ever happened to 70% of them compared to what they had had before. 585-12, is there any way I can add to my income now? Answer: it is sufficient unto the day. As there is the opportunity to use same, it will be given, and it will be prepared a way for thee. There are ways, but let them present themselves as self makes self more gratified or contented where it is. Do not become too satisfied, but make self content. Actually, it's more of a quote from the Cayce readings I had down there at the bottom, because he talks about what we should always desire to do is to be content, but not satisfied. Because when you're content, you are out there saying, I am happy. I don't have, as Cayce said in the word, anxiety. But if I'm content, and that's fine. But if you're not yet satisfied, that means you have the need to be able to go ahead and move forward, keep moving forward, so that you can prosper yourself and others in greater ways if we're just dealing with prosperity. If you are satisfied, that's when you stop. That's when you're saying, oh, this is enough. And it's kind of like, I retired, so I don't need to worry about money. I've got enough right now. I'm not going to try to learn anything else. I'm not going to try to do anything better. I'm just going to sit in the porch or watch TV or whatever it is. So that's where you start to understand, don't be satisfied, be content, but not satisfied, to continue moving forward. Okay, our last section here is on prosperous health. Because remember, if you're going to have a well-balanced life, you're going to have your health, your wealth, and your relationships all in proper balance. So, oh, I don't know if you can read that. I can't. And I don't know how I can get that down there. What is prosperous? Okay, so in this case, the person is asking, they're trying to figure out how can I bring in more money is the bottom line. Answer. First, we would make for the conditions that have been indicated that a strong, healthy, well-balanced physical body may find with its activities to make for same. A budgeting of its efforts in mental and physical and spiritual things, so balance in all things, will find within itself, as it adjusts itself, those fields of activities presented to itself, so that when it is in a normal reaction, it may proceed in that it has chosen, or as may have been pointed out to self through these very activities in bringing health. For with health may come wealth if it is needed in that for the spiritual development. This is why talks like mine and anybody else who's out there studying the readings and then saying, here's my take on it, is so important. Because if you understood that, that was one sentence. That whole answer there is one sentence. Very difficult syntax, and the context of it was kind of difficult to be able to bring out until you get to that last line there where it says, for with health may come wealth if it is needed in that for the spiritual development. This is especially in health. I don't know if you're familiar with the Edgar Cayce channel that we have on YouTube. But I created 3 reveries for that had to do with health, wealth, and relationships. And in the health one, it takes you through a process of asking yourself questions that will help you to become healthy. And remember, I said, how can I use this to my best advantage? Here's one of the questions you can ask yourself if you're having health challenges. And that is, what will I do differently with my life if I am healed of this malady? What will I do differently? Because the health challenge that you have before you is there to bring your attention to that very thing. And you're in the same way that pain works to the body to be able to say, I need to be healed right here, fear works to the mind. So if you have a thing in your head that every time it comes up, you start to feel fear or guilt or shame, that is like a pain sensor that's saying, pay attention to this. There needs to be healing on whatever this thing happens to be. Well, in terms of health, you have pain or some part of the body that is letting you know, I need to be healed here. And one of the best ways to be able to heal something is say, God, if I am healed, I am going to make a difference by doing this. So set a goal that not only helps you to become healthy, but also helps you to be of greater service to other people. And as, believe it or not, all of that verbiage up above it says, as you do that, you are going to wind up being healed so that you can be a better channel of blessings of God's love in this earth. So you have to understand that if you really don't have health, you don't have anything else. You can be the richest person in the world, and if you can't get out of bed, that isn't going to do you a whole lot of good. Another Marianne Williamson quote: "You must learn a new way to think before you can master a new way to be." I was 18 years old and hadn't really, I didn't want to go to college. And I was just trying, and I said, okay, I'm going to go out there into the working world and just impress everybody with who I am. Yeah, that didn't work so well. I wasn't even able to get a job so much at that point. And I even went out and got a motorcycle because I couldn't afford a car, but I could get a little cheap motorcycle to be able to commute to wherever I needed to go. And I had a friend of mine that said, you know what, you can get a job as a day porter down at Newport Center. Any of you live in or been to California, Newport Center is like the Newport Beach is a very fancy area with Fashion Island shopping center and big tall buildings and lots of commerce and wealth. And said, you can be a day porter over there, in which you just go to amongst all these 4 high-rise buildings. If they need things cleaned up, you go ahead and take care of that. I said, oh, God, that sounds easy enough. So I go down, I apply for the job, I get the job. And when I show up, I find out that my supervisor has an entirely different point of view of what's going on there. I think I'm just going to be on a radio. They call me, I go, otherwise, I don't have much to do. Other than, maybe dump some trash cans or something like that along the way. But he comes in and he goes, the last guy that had this job really took advantage of it. He goes, this radio works down in that Fashion Island shopping center. And so he would just go down there and he'd, be in the food court, or he'd be shopping, or he'd be talking to all of his friends, buddies down there. And if he got a call on the radio, then he'd come back over and actually start doing his job. You don't get to do that. And he hands me a brush and a bucket. And he goes, I want you to wash the common area walls of every floor of these 4 high-rise buildings if you are not on a call taking care of something we specifically asked you to do. And if I find that you're not scrubbing these walls, you're fired. So I was either a wall scrubber or I was unclogging a toilet, I guess. That was my job description. And it was not what I thought I had signed on for. But I also needed money. I had a motorcycle that actually had a payment that needed to be made, or they were going to come take the motorcycle and I wouldn't have the job because I couldn't get to it. And the guy just kind of throws it at me and he turns around and he walks out. And I'm holding this brush and this bucket. I'm thinking, I am pathetic. And I looked up, and when you're in the lobby of a building that they have the reader board that has the little press-in letters. That's how long ago it was. So they had the press-in letters that gave you the directory of all of the businesses that were in there. And so the first thing that happened is I looked on that thing, and it's covered with glass, and I could see my reflection in the glass, and I truly was pathetic with my bucket and my brush going, this is going to be my life from here on. This is what if I'm not going to college, et cetera, this is what I can count on for this. And then suddenly I quit looking at my image on there, and I realized that the Irvine Company, which was the owner of all this property, had their headquarters on the 7th floor. I said, okay, something's telling me I should go start on the 7th floor. And I went up there, and mind you, this is back in the 70s, and you were still allowed to smoke inside of office buildings and all of that. And I went up there, and I'm not kidding, they had white Berber carpet in the common areas of the hallway there. And it was yellowed from all of the tobacco smoke and the tar and the nicotine and whatever else had turned this white Berber carpet into a really, like a traffic light yellow after all that time. I said, this is a great place for me to start. So I get my bucket and my brush and I get the soap and stuff in there, and I start so that I'm really close to where the receptionist is when the people come off of the thing. And I am doing anything I can to make that woman happy. I'm changing the toner and the toner and the copier. I am putting the 5-gallon water jug, when that needs to be changed over there. If they have copy paper that needs to come out of the storage room, I'm putting that over there, and she is just as happy as she can be with me. And then as I'm actually scrubbing on these walls, I have the president, the vice president, the executive vice presidents, everybody walking by going, that looks outstanding, because it really did go back to being perfectly white again. And they probably remembered when it was white, and they're going, this is great. Man, I could really be proud of this place and the way it's going. So I do this for about a week, and all of a sudden this supervisor who's really being so rude to me comes in, and he was even ruder. He goes, I don't know why, but I'm being told to give you a 50-cent an hour raise. And so I go, oh, wow, hey, that's cool, as he hands me my paycheck. So I continue on, and I'm doing all of these common area white Berber carpet walls. But the problem is I can see by the time my next paycheck's coming up, I'm going to be done with the 7th floor. And I realize I'm going to be out of mind and out of reach for all of that. Anyway, when I was finishing up just about when the next paycheck was due, and the guy comes in and he goes, I don't know how you've done it, but he goes, not only am I supposed to give you a raise, the Irvine Company is now requested that you become the night supervisor so that you can show everybody else how this building should be cleaned. So that put me in charge of making other people's lives miserable scrubbing walls instead of me myself having to do it, which wasn't my goal, but I was looking at it going, I'm just choosing not to participate in having my life be nothing but scrubbing walls for the rest of my life. And I never did have to go do, manual labor like that again for a living. So it was really quite an important lesson for me. And how the metaphor of the whole thing is, when did that change? It changed when I'm standing there in the lobby and I'm looking and commiserating with my pathetic self in the reflection of that reader board, or I took the focus off of what I was looking at and saw what the possibilities were in front of me, being the owner of this entire property out here being available if I'll just go up to the 7th floor instead of feeling sorry for myself. 264, this is a Search for God reading. To whom should I go to for financial aid in order to pay for medical treatments? That's what all that's referring to. Why go to anyone for aid? Go to the doctor she's been going to. Dr. Brenner is willing to carry on with those treatments. If he is not, then he is not worthy of being called one that would administer to the betterment of influences in individuals' lives. In other words, Cayce's saying, go to Dr. Brenner and work out some kind of a payment plan with him. And if he's any kind of a healer that is really there trying to heal you, then he's going to do that. And if it's not, go find somebody that isn't just in it for the money, because somebody else is going to be a better healer than Dr. Brenner would be if that's how he feels about it. I can in terms of a castor oil consciousness, some of you have probably heard that term, but there was a time when Edgar had given a reading that Hugh Lynn was the one that was conducting, and it was for, I'll just call it arthritis or something. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was a common medical malady that came up over and over again. And whatever Cayce had recommended for this individual was saying that excluded, didn't mention castor oil. So as Hewlin was taking it down, he even said it at the end. He goes, and what about castor oil packs? And Cayce's answer was, this individual does not have a castor oil consciousness. In other words, that was hooey in this guy's mind. Cayce, from his ethereal perspective, or the Akashic records on the other side, even though he's getting ready to say, from the other side, he goes, oh, and castor oil, no, this guy is not going to like castor oil at all. In fact, it'll actually make him not want to do any of this stuff. So let's just leave it off the list. I am one of the people, I have to admit this in front of everybody here. How embarrassing. My mother, being raised in the Great Depression, wanted to save as much money as she could, especially in these times of financial challenges. And she would keep castor oil for a very long time. And the way that she did that was taking that quart bottle of castor oil, pouring it into a broiler pan, and she'd add the 3 layers of flannel cloth that she would leave soaking in there. And it was a permanent resident of our refrigerator. And anytime that I needed to have castor oil treatments, in fact, I needed them over my abdomen at one point when I was rather young, she would go pull this thing out of a 40-degree refrigerator, go into the room, my room, and lay this 40-degree castor oil pack on my stomach. And did she follow it with a heating pad? Yes, but it took a while. She never even turned the heating pad on early. It just took a while for that to be able to be what I think Cayce intended. And I wind up not having, should I say, a castor oil consciousness, because it just devastated. To this day, I don't even put ice on an injury because I hate the cold. No wonder I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. But in terms of a castor oil consciousness, you have to be able to make sure that the person's mind is in tune with what's going on there. And it works both ways in this case. If the doctor is not truly a healer that's willing to work this out with you, it doesn't matter whether you have a castor oil consciousness or not if they don't believe in what they're doing. 333-5. What success can be reached in this development, and how long will it take? So this is talking about a business, and said, how successful will it be and how long will it take? Unless it can be made a success without an individual paying, Now, I'm thinking in the context of this, since I had to take it out of context, we're talking about somebody that's just going to support a like a nonprofit venture. Unless it can be made a success without an individual paying the bills on it, then it cannot be made a success with all or double capacity. In other words, if somebody has to foot the bill, if it can't be made to pay for itself along the way, you're not really doing a worthwhile endeavor. For he that saves not, or that is not constructive, when there is the least above the absolute necessities, does not make for construction, or for the saving, or for the creative forces, when there is the larger. For as the twig is bent, so is the tree. So you wind up having, for the ARE, we have to change the mindset when we have much less money than we had before, COVID and the ARE camp debacle thing that's, been so devastating. We have to be able to figure out how the ARE can wind up paying instead of hoping that somebody's going to, come by and drop a few $1 million on us with a donation. So that's really kind of an analogous situation that works in what we're all what we find near and dear to our hearts. I'm reminded, Stephanie and I were part of a prosperity group over in Unity of Phoenix, and I remember there was a woman that came in there and she had just these wonderful ideas about what she wanted to do, and I started asking her, how in the world is this going to support itself? Where do you wind up making money and what it is that you're talking about here? And she goes, oh no, this is done on government grants. And I found out that she had gone through her whole life going from one nonprofit organization to another that was based on government grants. And as soon as the government grant wasn't there anymore, she was out of a job. And I just intuitively felt right at that point, you need to go out and figure out within the working world that's not government grants, how do you work within an environment in which a business can stand on its own 2 feet, even if it's a nonprofit organization that isn't just waiting for the government to write them a check? And you could tell that was not going over well with her. She kept, I mean, her mindset was such that, no, we get this big amount of money from a grant and then we go spend it and then we go get more. And so I think really what the whole point of this reading is pretty much the same thing, saying if you can't make it so it stands on its own, don't try to find somebody with deep pockets that's going to make it limp along. Oh, didn't talk about relationships, but this is a real short section of the whole thing. Henry Ford again, most people spend more time and energy going around problems than in trying to solve them. This is Stephanie's reading along. She sees SS layoffs move to PF. I know that means something to her because, yeah, I'm getting a verbal commitment from the back. The what happened was she was when she became a registrar, then she was promoted to the point where she was actually teaching the registrars of this rather large college. And so they had 60 some odd locations out there, and she would go around trying to solve problems for all of the registrars in the individual place, she and some other people. And then the company started to run on hard time, found themselves in hard times, and they offered an interesting thing. They said, if you will voluntarily retire early, we will give you a rather lucrative severance package. And there were about 4 or 5 people that were in Stephanie's department. Now, one of them was, I think, already 62 years old, so it would have been more difficult for her to go ahead and get another job after that. Another guy had just bought a new house and had a brand new baby. Another one was actually Stephanie's boss, who was, organizing the department, and she had, kids and an ailing spouse, et cetera, at that time. And what she was able to see, bottom line, is that Stephanie was the one that, first of all, had a prosperity consciousness, had no fear about this, was very willing to take a nice severance package and go find another job outside of that because she was much better suited to do that, both mentally and financially and just circumstances, than anybody else that was in there. And so she took the bullet and said, I'll take the early retirement package. Well, the best thing about that is I think they gave her 9 months. So they continued to pay her as if she worked for them for 9 months. After 3 months, she went and got a job, which thank God, because when my wife had 3 months to do nothing but shop, that was expensive. Yeah, she's having fun with that. But she went out and got another job 3 months into this. So she had another 6 months worth of double pay, which she was getting from the other company. Well, the other company had hired her at significantly less money than she had been making before. But again, she's not unwilling to go in there and prove who she is and get promoted along the way. So she had been with them for about 6 months when when the other money had run out. And so she said, started looking for another job, and she wound up finding another job that paid about what she was making before. And she went in to put in her notice at the company that she worked for, and they didn't want her to leave. And they actually improved the offer to get her to stay rather than leave the company, which she didn't want to do. She's going to have to do an hour commute to get to the one, and the one she was at was only 10 minutes away. And so she wound up making more money after that period of time when the double payments wound up going away. She was now making more money than she was when she was with her previous company, and the previous company was ultimately went bankrupt. Everybody got laid off, is what I mean from that point. So she went into it saying, you know what, I can take this better than anybody else in my department. And I have no fear about it. And if I'm doing it right, then I'm even going to be better off now than I was back then. How many years have you been there now, Stephanie? 13 years. And she is making, I don't know, 50% more money than when she went to then even after she got the raise from where she was before. And when COVID hit, she wound up working out of the house for the rest of her career. She's only got a couple of years to go till she hits Medicare age. So life has been good for her. And it worked out perfectly because of having the right attitude and knowing that she was going to be safe. That's my wife, Stephanie, on the left, and me, obviously much younger, on the right. I even have a note there saying we're in the Micronesian Islands. Actually, we're there with Herb and Ann Purrier. And Ann Purrier is no doubt taking the picture right there. And the reason we're so happy is because I'm petting a local dog down below, but you can't see it. Yes, we are dog lovers. The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not into fighting the old, but in building the new, on building the new. That goes all the way back to Socrates. So this is no new thinking that comes up from anybody out there. We do resist change, but how is anything ever going to get better in our lives unless we change? All right. So that's the important part. Oh, sorry. Just one last reading. 257. Most of you know David Kahn. So here's David Kahn asking about how to open a business in New York and for it to be, will it be successful and still allow him to spiritually develop himself? The answer, this would indicate from the questioner that there is a difference in being a material success and in developing spiritually and mentally in a material way. The question itself is based improperly. What a great answer. I mean, often do we wind up thinking, well, that's just business, and you wind up not treating somebody as you would like to be treated, as Jesus recommends. You go, well, that's just business. And it's almost like business has nothing to do with how we're supposed to treat everybody else. When you're in business, that's got a whole different set of rules. Well, Cayce is making it very clear here that's not true. So the same loving approach is to be used toward not only business, but toward our friends, and in fact, any situation. And I end up on a cat in a hat thing here in relationships. We are all a little weird, and life's a little weird. And when we find someone whose weirdness is compatible with ours, we join up with them and fall in mutual weirdness and call it love. Or we can call it the ARE, or Contemporary Cayce of Canada. And that's it.